I've had my 2024 Tiger 900 Rally Pro for 3 months now, and over the last 3,000 kilometers or 1,900 miles, I've been doing this, and a bit of this. And so I thought it was time for a review. The Tiger's a great bike, and I am very happy with it overall, but as with any bike, it's not perfect. The question is it good enough to replace the Transalp and the Speed Twin 1200 that I sold to buy it? So join me on a ride from Paderna in southern Portugal up to a Buddhist shrine in the Algarve Hills, and I'll go through the good and the bad, starting with the negatives. Now, none of these is a deal breaker, at least for me, but there are a handful of irritations of the "it would have been so simple to fix" type. And given that this is a 2024 iteration of the bike, and therefore a facelift, a version 2.0 of the first generation Tiger 900 that launched in 2020, I can't help wondering how Triumph could let these slip through the net again. Before we get to my biggest bugbears, let's start off with a couple of minor niggles. First of all, the poorly fitting seat. Now, it's been redesigned for 2024. It's flatter, wider, and even more comfortable than the previous generation. One of the most comfortable seats I've sat on this side of a Goldwing, but it's really not easy to clip into place. There are 2 height settings, which is great, I like having that, and 1 letterbox shaped slot in the front into which you insert the tab at the front of the seat. Sounds easy enough, but as you're doing this, you've also got to align the front height bar on the seat with the clips on the bike, while also making sure that the rear height bar is properly seated on the chassis. Once that's done, you have to sort of wiggle the rear passenger seat into place to lock the front seat, press down, and just hope everything is where it should be. You can't see much, it all has to be done by feel or guesswork, and even when stroke if you've got everything into place, you're left with this unsightly gap against the tank, which plays on your mind and makes you think that you haven't got the seat in place properly after all. The gap is there on both height settings. I've posted the question in forums and asked Triumph Algarve about it, but apparently, inexplicably, this is how it's been designed. Triumph is usually so careful with perceived quality and fit and finish. Why let this slip through, and in such an obvious place? The important thing, I suppose, is that the seat is very comfortable once in place. It's just a pity the mechanism isn't a bit simpler to use. Right, niggle number 2 is the lack of a rear hugger or splash guard. Now, I think this is remiss on any bike with a monoshock, but on an adventure bike that's clearly designed to go off-road, it's completely unforgivable and could be solved in the factory with a 50-cent piece of plastic. There's no mudguard or splash protection for the rear wheel, meaning that grit and debris from the road and water and mud from a trail is going to be flung directly onto and into the rear shock. This is what was deposited on the swing arm brace after the 10-mile, 16-kilometer ride back home from the dealer when the bike was brand new on warm, dry roads a few weeks ago. Even Honda, who are well known for penny pinching, put this piece of protective plastic on the rear of the Transalp, so for Triumph to skimp on it is inexcusable. Fortunately, Pyramid Plastics in the UK do make a part specifically to remedy this, which is very helpful of them, but really we shouldn't need to rely on their ingenuity after spending over 17,000 euros on a new bike. This is what it looks like after 3,000 kilometers of dry use, grit and muck that would now be embedded in the rear shock. And if you look in the description, you'll find a 10% discount on Pyramid products. Right, so let's have a look at the bigger annoyances. The main source of irritation for me with the Tiger 900 is the front end, more specifically the cockpit area. First off, the position of the key. The problem here is that Triumph have positioned it on, as it were, the wrong side of the handlebars, so close to the tank and rider that if you like to use a tank bag, as I do, getting to the key is very awkward. No problem on the Honda Transalp that I was running last year. The ignition key is on the other side of the bars towards the dash. Never had a problem with my tank bag. Fortunately, the Pro City bag from SW Motec comes with an adjustable mounting mechanism which I've adapted to slide back and forth by tightening the screws just enough to hold it in place and holding them in with some thread locker. This means I can continue using my favourite bag, but I still have to reach around it to take the key in and out, even when it's been pushed back towards me as far as it'll go. Keyless would solve all this, of course. I know a lot of owners prefer starting the bike the old-fashioned way with a key, but I have keyless in our car, in my van, and even on my Honda scooter, and I just love the convenience. Okay, you have to change the battery once a year, but other than that, it's plain sailing. While on the subject of the key, I've been finding it very difficult to engage the steering lock to the point where I often give up and just leave the bars on full lock to make it appear as though the lock is on. The whole ignition barrel feels cheap, as if it's about to break. I thought it might just be my bike, but I asked my friend who bought a 2024 GT Pro a couple of weeks before me, and he has exactly the same problems. In fact, even worse, the transponder in one of his two keys wasn't being recognised by the bike at all, so he had to use a spare and carry both keys around with him just in case. He was given a replacement key under warranty, but it's all slightly disconcerting, and maybe Triumph need to rethink the whole key thing on the Tiger and maybe consider changing supplier. Even better, give us keyless like on the Tiger 1200. The second annoying thing is the poorly designed graphical user interface, or the electronics. Now, the story is that Triumph was in the process of updating all their user interfaces and then ran into supply issues with the processing chips in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic. So for the moment at least, we're all stuck with displays that are a few years behind the times. Now, the one taken from the Tiger 1200 for the 2024 900 is an improvement on the previous generations, but it takes an age to boot up, is not very responsive, and has a few quirks that I wouldn't have thought required that much time or money to correct. A couple of examples: the odometer, total mileage, or lack thereof. That's right, there's no odometer on the new Tiger 900. Well, that's not strictly true. There is one, but it's so deeply hidden in the sub-menus that it takes an age to get to it. Now, I promise that I'm not exaggerating here. I'm going as quickly, as normally as I would do in an everyday situation. But just watch how laborious it is to find the total mileage. You're probably thinking to yourself, yeah, but I only glance at my total mileage maybe once or twice a month. What's the big deal? And yes, I agree. In normal use, you don't really need to know the bike's total mileage. Except when you're running the bike in, as I was until recently, you do. First 480 kilometers, avoid going beyond 5,000 RPM. Then from 480 to 960, you can go up to 6,000 and so on, right up to the end of the running period at 1,600 kilometers. Okay, no problem, I'll be good, respect the engineer's advice and stick to the numbers as well as I possibly can, except it takes me forever to see how many miles I've done. Can you imagine doing all this while riding? The previous generation Tiger 900 used to flash the mileage onto the screen for a couple of seconds on startup, which was better than nothing, but on the 2024 Plus model, you have to get busy with the joystick. This is annoying in the garage, downright dangerous out on the road. There's always the app, which shows the total mileage, but it often fails to connect, and so continues to display the total mileage from a few rides back, meaning that I always end up checking the dash anyway to make sure. The second weird thing on the dash, there are actually quite a few inconsistencies, but I'll just highlight two here. This warning light showing you that you've got the fog light switched on. No problem with that, a nice green light just to remind you they're on in case you might want to switch them off, except press the home button on the right to display your fuel consumption and range, as I often do, and the warning light inexplicably migrates to here. I didn't notice at first and thought the fog lights must switch themselves off after a certain time, but no, some bright spark at the factory thought it would be a good idea to integrate warning lights that randomly move around the screen. Good one. The third negative, on the road, even the Rally Pro model has fantastic handling for a tall adventure bike with a 21-inch front wheel, and the GT Pro is even better with its 19-inch front end. Some of this is down to the relatively steep 24-degree rake of the forks, which means that it can feel a bit twitchy off-road. That's the downside. Now, I personally don't mind this, as I don't do that much off-roading. When I do, it's more plodding serenely along smooth gravel tracks than racing over boulders. But even I can feel a difference between this and, say, the Transalp I had last year, which was more stable off-road. Again, not really a problem for me personally. I'll take the better on-road handling any day, but for more ardent off-roaders this could be a deal breaker. The next negative is the wind protection. Now the Transalp was great for this, especially with the taller touring windscreen and optional deflectors that I fitted. The Tiger is less great. The screen is height adjustable, which is nice, but as I'm 187 centimeters or about 6'2", I leave it in its highest position all the time anyway. But it is quite narrow, which allows wind round the sides. It's not too much of a problem when I'm riding like this, but on motorways where I'm doing between 120 and more, it's not the best. Much better than on my recently departed Speed Twin Naked, of course, but it's not as good as the Transalp, and given how sumptuous the rest of the ride is, it's a shame. You can get aftermarket solutions, of course, in the form of larger screens, but they don't always look the best, and it kind of annoys me to have to replace large parts that I've already paid for on a motorcycle that's just come out of the factory. Also, and this could just be my imagination, the Tiger does seem quite susceptible to side winds. Portugal is quite a windy country, especially in the summer when the land gets very hot and the Atlantic Ocean remains stubbornly cold, so this is something I've noticed. I know all adventure bikes are a bit slab-sided, and this is probably the reason, but I don't remember getting blown around quite so much on the Honda Transalp that I was running last year. Next negative, the heat from the radiator. A common complaint about the first generation Tiger 900 was how the twin fans blew hot air directly onto the rider's knees. Triumph's engineers have tried to address the issue on this facelifted model by incorporating an extra side vent in the fairing, and while things now do seem better, the problem still persists. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that for me it's not really a problem. In the winter, I wear these Roadskin Taranis jeans, 10% off with a discount code RocketMan, see the description. AAA rated, so naturally they integrate knee protection, but so do all riding jeans I've ever seen, and given how thick the fabric and knee protectors are, I think the air temperature would have to be a lot higher than that coming off the Tiger's radiator for me to be bothered by it. Now the weather is warmer, I've started wearing my Revit Eclipse vented pants with their aerated knee protectors. Well, I've had them on for the last couple of weeks with ambient temperatures ranging from about 25 to 32 degrees centigrade, and yes, if I think about it, I can feel the hot air on this part of my legs. It's not uncomfortable, but I definitely can feel it. Then, in the name of science, I thought I'd conduct an experiment. I put my normal everyday Levi jeans on and took the bike out for a ride. Ambient temperature about 28 degrees C, and bingo, I could definitely feel a lot of heat going from the top of my knees up to about halfway up my upper leg, exactly where the knee armour and reinforced, i.e. non-vented fabric section is on my mesh pants. I don't want to be drawn into any hasty conclusions here, but all I can say is that when I wear my thick winter riding jeans or my summer mesh pants with reinforced knees, I feel very little from the radiator, yet when I wear non-riding Levi's, the sensation is very pronounced, not to say uncomfortable. So, I'm not trying to dismiss the complaints from other owners that I've seen online. Depending on your riding conditions, it could be an issue, and consequently, and I'm no engineer, I don't get why Triumph didn't increase the angle of this bit of fairing to push the air away from the knees and block off this slit here that's always going to let the heat through directly to the rider. Overall, it's a pretty poor design. On the Tiger 1200, the radiators and fans are set almost at 90 degrees to the rider's legs, and the fairing immediately in front of the knees has a prominent scoop to carry as much hot air away laterally as possible. I've tried it and it works, so I don't really understand why they didn't incorporate a similar design into the 900. Anyway, that's enough negativity. Let's have a look at the many positive aspects of this Tiger 900. First of all, the brakes. The 2024 GT and Rally Pro get linked braking. This is something I'd experienced before when testing high-end bikes, but it's the first on a bike that I've actually owned. It's part of the 2024 update package, so previous iterations of the Tiger unfortunately don't have the feature, but strangely, Triumph haven't made that big a deal of it, and details have proven difficult to find. In a nutshell, when you apply the front brake only, the onboard computer will now also automatically apply some back brake. I've heard the figure 10% bandied about, but exactly how much force is applied remains a bit of a mystery. In any case, along with the top line Brembo stylemas up front, the brakes are phenomenal with more than enough stopping power for what is a relatively light mid-size adventure bike. It's the same setup as on the Rocket 3, which is over 100 kilos heavier, so that says it all really. The second thing I like are the self-cancelling indicators that actually work. Not exactly new, but the inertial measurement unit, or IMU, means that the self-cancelling indicator feature does actually work. I've had bikes in the past, including my recently departed Honda Transalp, where the indicators are just automatically deactivated after a given number of flashes or number of seconds. Sounds okay in theory, but on the giant roundabouts we have here in Europe, you find that they switch off halfway round, which means that in addition to being in the correct gear and turning the bike and watching out for traffic, you also have to keep an eye on the indicators to see if they're still on. On the handful of bikes I've owned with this feature, I've ended up deactivating it in the menu. The Tiger's IMU works out when you've finished your manoeuvre and only then switches off the indicators. It's not 100% foolproof, but it's about as accurate as the mechanical mechanisms we've had on cars for decades and is good enough in most situations. Things I like: number 3, the rubber damped handlebars. Actually, I'm in two minds about this. Yes, they definitely help. There's less vibration through the bars than on the first generation, and that's great. Thank you, Triumph. However, it's hard to know how much of this decrease is down to the engine tweaks and how much is down to the rubber damping. Secondly, and I sincerely apologise in advance to the hard-working Triumph engineers if I've got this completely wrong, but the only evidence I can see of the damping mechanism are these 4 rubber washers above and below the top clamp. Is that it? Now, I'm sure they have to be made from some super sophisticated polymer so as not to wear out and maintain decent feel, but surely they can't cost more than a few pennies each. Please, Triumph, in fact please all manufacturers, fit them to every bike. As things stand, vibration through the bars is better than on the first generation, but it's still there, especially at motorway speeds, and despite having also fitted a pair of grip puppies, I'm grateful for the cruise control, as this allows me to take my right hand off the throttle for a few seconds to flex some life back into my numb fingers. Number 4, good thing, the engine. One of the nicest engines I've tried on any mid-size adventure bike, and a marked improvement over the first generation Tiger 900, which I always found slightly bland. This time it gets plenty of top-end power and is also remarkably tractable at lower revs. Never seems to splutter no matter how low you are in the rev range, and is always willing to pull away cleanly. It's very easy to ride fast, easier than my Speed Twin, which had about the same power, but a lot more torque available, a lot lower down in the rev range. Fantastically beefy engine, the Speed Twin, great in a straight line, but it wasn't the best in the bends. The Tiger, despite its 21-inch front wheel, is very natural in the bends, and as long as you keep the engine spinning above about 4,500 RPM, there's ample power to keep you entertained. Number 5, the sheer versatility of the Tiger. Okay, wind protection ain't the best, but with its cruise control, heated seat and grips, the Tiger can whisk me along the motorway in comfort, provide the fun and flexibility in the twisties with my mates, and allow me to muck about a bit off-road like I used to as a kid on my BMX. Here's a prime example of the kind of low-key off-roading I like to do. Once I downed a super block at the rest point, I noticed the track up to the Buddhist shrine, and so went up on the bike before heading back down. Granted, this is not the most arduous off-road course in the world, but as a bit of an off-road novice, it is reassuring to know that I'm only using 10% of the bike's off-road capabilities. There are hundreds of kilometres of gravel track here in Portugal, and while I've actually yet to find one that does go anywhere interesting, it is fun exploring. My previous bike, the Honda Transalp, could do all this, of course, but it wasn't quite as polished, not as sumptuous. The Tiger can do everything just that little bit easier. Wouldn't it have made more sense for me to go for the Tiger 1200? Well, I would have liked the extra power, I'm not going to deny that. 108 horsepower is enough for me. 150 would have been even nicer. But the 1200 is 25 kilos heavier, which negates a chunk of that power advantage, and makes it more unwieldy off-road for someone like me who has limited off-road experience. It has a shaft drive which is heavy, expensive, mechanically inefficient, and does still require servicing from time to time, and the bike costs around €6,000 more for largely identical features: cruise control, heated seats, identical dash, etc. I just didn't think it was worth it. Number 6, crash protection. The lower crash bars and bash plate that come standard with a Rally Pro have been upgraded for 2024 and look more than adequate for the light off-roading that I do. Just as well, really, as I'm beginning to come round to the idea that unless you're into seriously hardcore off-road riding that requires 10mm thick armour plating everywhere, then you may well be better off sticking to factory options. I've read a fair few posts online of Tiger owners who've fitted aftermarket bars experiencing sheared bolts and even cracked subframes, and rumour has it that Triumph is refusing claims under warranty if non-factory bars have been used. Suffice it to say that I've left the lower protection well alone and just replaced the rather fragile plastic handguards with some sturdier bark busters, which provide both better wind shielding and protection for the bike in the event of a drop. Number 7 on the list of good things, fuel economy. I've averaged 4.5 litres per 100 kilometres so far, which I think is pretty good for a 900. It's only fractionally more than I was getting from the Transalp 750. I think I ride at above average speeds and do enjoy the acceleration the 108 horsepower offers. So well done for Triumph for getting such good figures. I guess this is one of the plus sides of Euro 5. So with all that being said, am I glad I changed? When I told you about the sale of my Speed Twin and Transalp, quite a few people expressed concern in the comments that I was going to miss my Speed Twin 1200. And my answer to that is I don't think I have, at least I haven't for the moment. Without going over all the details again, I was basically weary of having to run 5 vehicles, a scooter, 2 bikes, a car and a van, because there was always one that needed fuel in the tank or air in the tyres, an oil change, insurance or road tax, and I just wanted to downsize a bit. And the second thing was that I realised as much as I enjoyed looking at the Speed Twin in the garage, I was using it less and less, especially since I got the Transalp. I do miss not seeing the Triumph in the garage, but in the 3 months I've been riding the Tiger, I can honestly say that not once have I thought to myself, I'd be enjoying myself even more if I were on the Speed Twin. The Transalp opened my eyes to the versatility and all-round usefulness of mid-size adventure bikes in a way that the smaller CB500X never did, and so I decided to sell both in favour of what is basically a super Transalp. Triumph Algarve gave me a generous trade-in price on the Speed Twin, and I sold the Transalp privately within 48 hours for slightly more than I'd paid for it a year previously, thanks to all the add-ons like the Hepco and Becker crash bars, Barkbuster handguards and a Kropovich exhaust. I had to buy some new SW Motec rear carriers and Barkbusters for the Tiger, of course, but at the end of the day I had a brand new bike, about €4,500 in my pocket, and one less vehicle to worry about. The Tiger does it all, back roads, off-road and motorway in comfort. I'm happy with my downsizing. Why didn't I go for the GT Pro? Well, Steve, a friend of mine, bought this white 2024 GT Pro about a month before I got mine, and in a nutshell, I would have had the Rally Pro not been available. The GT is a fine machine. See the comprehensive review I did of it back in January if you're interested. But I'm quite tall at 1.87 m or 6'2", so I appreciate the extra seat height of the Rally. The Transalp convinced me of the comfort and decent handling of a 21-inch front wheel, so I wasn't worried about that. As I've mentioned, while I rarely go off-road, I do enjoy having the option to do so. And finally, with due deference to Steve, I think the Rally is slightly better looking, with its spoked wheels and gold forks, and I really like this matte green paint over the white frame, which you can't get on the GT. Is the Tiger 900 the right bike for me? Yes, I think it is. It perfectly matches the sort of riding I do here in the Algarve, and after years of chopping and changing every 6 months to the great amusement of many of you, I think it's a keeper. Don't laugh. It's versatile, comfortable, well equipped, powerful enough, has good handling, it's roomy for the rider and offers plenty of luggage options. If it were a car, it would be maybe a BMW X3. It may be not the sexiest or most desirable bike on the market, and I continue to secretly drool over bikes like this BMW R20 concept, or hope that Triumph will one day get round to developing a speed twin 1200 RS with 150 Newton meters of torque at 2000 RPM. But honestly, even if I could afford to buy one, I really don't know when I'd use it. Is the Tiger 900 the right bike for everyone? Probably not. Mrs. RM sat on the rider's seat the other day and commented on what a huge beast of a thing it was. She's only 1m60, 47 kilos, so clearly it's too big for her. And Steve, my friend, who bought his GT Pro a few weeks before I got my bike, said that he sat on the rally in the dealer showroom several times, desperately trying to convince himself that he was indeed tall enough for it. So it's a big bike. It's not that heavy at 219 kilos wet, but it is quite tippy and therefore not the easiest to move around in the garage. The flip side is that it offers a sumptuous ride and impeccable high-speed stability, which is what I was looking for. There are niggles like the lack of wind protection, the poorly designed dash, the hot air on the knees thing, but it's a bike that I use a lot, and I have no regrets selling both my Transalp and my Speed Twin 1200 for it. That's all for today. As always, thanks for watching.